Motivation, I guess, when it comes down to the last rounds of the slam. And
Djokovic finally speaks, and the tennis world went cold, not because of what he said, because of who it fits. Right now, Alcaraz is sitting at home with a broken wrist and a Roland Garros title gathering dust. Barcelona, Madrid, Rome, gone. The defending Grand Slam champion hasn't touched a competitive court in weeks, but the sponsorship checks, every single one is still clearing. Nike, Rolex, BMW, $35 million last year alone, regardless of whether he wins, loses, or plays at all. The court went silent. The money never did. And that's exactly the culture Djokovic is describing, without once saying the name. The man walked away from the world's most famous drink deal on pure principle. Hundreds of millions left on the table. So when he starts talking about what it costs to put sponsorship money over Grand Slams, the family running this empire doesn't need to be named. Here's what nobody in tennis is brave enough to ask. If the people with final say were never really choosing the trophies, what exactly have they been choosing all along? Subscribe now. Because the answer starts with a firing the tennis world tried to bury. It starts with a father who decided he outgrew the man who made his son immortal. Juan Carlos Ferrero didn't just coach Carlos Alcaraz, he built him. From the age of 15, Ferrero was the architect behind every swing, every decision, every Grand Slam title that turned a kid from Murcia into the most decorated 22-year-old in the history of men's tennis. 7 Grand Slams. A career Grand Slam completed at Melbourne in January 2026, the youngest man in the Open era to ever do it. Ferrero was there for all of it, every press conference, every locker room, every moment the world watched Alcaraz do something that shouldn't have been physically possible for someone his age. Then December 2025 arrived, and 5 words ended everything. Ferrero's own statement read, "I would have liked to continue." That sentence was not an exit. It was an obituary. A man who poured 7 years of his life into another human being, watched that human being rewrite tennis history, and then got walked to the door by the people who believed they no longer needed him. Ferrero didn't throw furniture. He didn't go to the press and detonate. He said 5 words, packed his things, and left the building that his coaching had largely constructed. So, who made that call? That is the question the mainstream tennis press danced around for weeks after the split became public. The answer, when it finally surfaced, was not surprising to anyone who had been watching closely. It was never Carlos Alcaraz, the player, who wanted Ferrero gone. Multiple sources confirmed it. Carlos Santos, the coach who worked with Alcaraz for 8 years before Ferrero, the man who watched this family operate from the inside, told the press directly. The father is the one who's really in charge. Santos didn't hedge, he didn't qualify it. He said Alcaraz would have continued with Ferrero for as long as Ferrero wanted. The son wasn't the one choosing. The father was. Carlos Alcaraz Sr. has been the central gravitational force in his son's career since the beginning. That is not unusual in tennis. Plenty of elite players have parents embedded in their professional structures. What makes this situation different is the scale of what was being managed, and the pattern of what happened to the people who didn't adapt to the family's terms. Santos himself left after 8 years under similar circumstances. He said it plainly. He wanted certain conditions. The father didn't see it that way, and that was the end of it. Ferrero lasted 7 years before hitting the same wall. 2 coaches, 15 combined years of service, both shown out under conditions that neither of them fully agreed with. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. Fernando Meligeni, a former professional player and a close friend of Ferrero's, described the dynamic in terms that made the situation impossible to misread. He said the problem was about commitment, about how much a coach was expected to give, where training would happen, how the schedule would be structured, and ultimately who had the final word when those conversations became difficult. His conclusion was blunt. The family won. The family always wins. Meligeni had no doubt about that outcome even before the split was announced. He said the coaching structure had shifted. The brother was on the team. The father was at the center. And the circle was getting tighter, not looser. That tightening circle matters because of what it controls. Carlos Alcaraz is not simply a tennis player with a sponsorship portfolio. He is one of the most commercially valuable athletes on the planet. The numbers behind his name are genuinely difficult to comprehend at his age. In the 12 months between September 2024 and August 2025, Alcaraz earned approximately $35 million from sponsorship deals and appearance fees alone. That figure does not include prize money. It does not include the bonus structure attached to his Grand Slam wins. It does not include the $1.5 million appearance fee he collected at the Six Kings Slam. It is purely the commercial machine running in the background while he competes. The contracts underpinning that machine are extraordinary. His Nike apparel deal is reported to be worth somewhere between $15 and $20 million per year across a 10-year agreement. Rolex sits in a similar bracket. Louis Vuitton, Calvin Klein, Babolat for his rackets. BMW extended its partnership with him for 3 additional years following his 2025 season, in which he won both the French Open and the US Open. Every major luxury brand that wants to attach itself to the future of sport has already written the check. The portfolio reads less like a tennis player's sponsorship page and more like the asset list of a mid-sized investment fund. That empire requires management. It requires decisions about which deals to take, which appearances to make, which image to project, and how to balance the commercial calendar against the competitive one. Those decisions, according to everyone who has spoken publicly about the inner workings of the Alcaraz camp, run through the family, specifically through the father, a man who now has more influence over the direction of his son's career than any coach, any agent, any outside voice, and a man who, based on what happened to Santos and Ferrero, does not respond well to pushback. This is where Djokovic becomes relevant in a way that goes far beyond a quote or a press conference answer. Novak Djokovic has built his entire public identity around the idea that values are non-negotiable, not as a slogan, not as branding, as a lived principle that has cost him real money and real opportunity over the course of his career. He has spoken about it in multiple interviews across multiple years. The detail that keeps surfacing is the drink deal, the sponsorship offer from what is widely believed to be the world's most famous soft drink company, an offer that, by any reasonable estimation, would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars across the length of his career. He turned it down. His reason was simple and unambiguous. He said he cannot represent something he does not believe in. He said it calmly. He has never expressed regret about it. That decision tells you something about how Djokovic thinks. He is a man who reached the absolute summit of his sport, who had every commercial door in the world open to him, and who still drew lines. Hard ones. The kind of lines that cost money when you hold them. His off-court earnings in 2024 sat at approximately $25 million. a figure that sounds enormous until you place it next to Alcaraz's $32 million for the same period. Djokovic has more Grand Slam titles than any player in history. He has been world number one for more weeks than any player in history. He is, by almost every measurable standard, the greatest tennis player who ever lived. And commercially, at the peak of his earning power, a 22-year-old with a father managing his empire is outpacing him by $7 million a year. Djokovic has never said that gap bothers him. What he has said, consistently and deliberately, is that he made choices, that the choices reflected what he believed, that the money he left on the table stayed on the table because he was not willing to compromise the principles he built his career on. When he speaks about sponsorship culture in tennis, about the commercial pressures that shape how players present themselves and what they attach their names to, he speaks from the position of a man who has already been tested by it and already decided where he stands. The contrast with the Alcaraz situation is not something Djokovic has stated directly. He has not sat in front of a camera and accused the Alcaraz family of prioritizing commercial income over competitive development. What he has done is describe in precise and consistent language what it looks like when a player and the people around that player make values the foundation of every decision. He has described the alternative without naming it. The tennis world, which has spent the last 6 months watching a legendary coach get fired amid reports of contract disputes and family power struggles, has been left to draw its own conclusions. Those conclusions are uncomfortable, because the alternative that Djokovic's framing implies, the world in which commercial interests quietly begin to shape competitive ones, has visible consequences in the Alcaraz story that are hard to ignore once you start looking for them. Consider the training-based dispute, one of the reported tensions between Ferrero and the family involved where Alcaraz would train. Ferrero operated from his academy in Villena. It is a serious, professional facility that produced a world number one in Ferrero himself and has the infrastructure to support elite preparation. The family wanted Alcaraz training in Murcia, closer to home, closer to the family's own academy, the tennis operation that Carlos Alcaraz Sr. has been building as a commercial venture, in parallel with his son's career. Ferrero reportedly resisted the idea of relocating. The family reportedly pushed. That push, combined with the contract dispute, contributed to a breakdown that ended 7 years of collaboration. The family's academy in Murcia is not just a training facility. It is a business. It carries the Alcaraz name. Its commercial value is directly tied to the profile of the player whose name it bears. Every time Carlos Alcaraz wins a Grand Slam, every time his face appears on a billboard or a luxury brand campaign, the value of that academy increases. The father's business interests and his son's career are not separate tracks running in parallel. They are intertwined in ways that create real conflicts when the people responsible for the competitive side of the operation start asking questions about priorities. Ferrero asked those questions. Santos asked them before him. Neither of them got satisfactory answers. What makes the current moment particularly sharp is the injury. Alcaraz's wrist broke down in Barcelona in April 2026. The injury, confirmed as tenosynovitis, inflammation of the tendon sheath, forced him out of the remainder of the clay court season. Madrid went. Rome went. Roland Garros, the title he had defended twice in succession and won in one of the greatest finals ever played, went with them. The two-time defending champion withdrew from his own tournament without hitting a ball in Paris. And here is where the commercial question bites hardest. The clay court season is not just the most physically demanding stretch of the tennis calendar. It is one of the most visible. The Madrid Open, which Alcaraz has won twice, and where he described not being able to play as one of the hardest things he has ever had to share publicly, draws massive commercial attention. The French Open is a global event that generates sponsorship activation on a scale that rivals the other Grand Slams. For the brands attached to Alcaraz, the ones paying tens of millions a year for his image, his absence from those events is a problem, not a catastrophic one, because the deals are structured to accommodate injury. But a problem nonetheless. The question that surfaces in that context is not whether the injury was caused by commercial overextension. Wrist injuries happen. Tenosynovitis is common among tennis players who generate heavy topspin. The physical demands on Alcaraz's body are objectively extreme. The question is whether the schedule leading up to that injury, the appearance commitments, the promotional obligations, the commercial calendar stacked alongside the competitive one, was structured with his physical durability as the first priority, or whether it was structured by people whose financial interests pointed in a different direction. That is the question Ferrero can no longer answer from the inside. That is the question Santos was never in a position to answer publicly. That is the question that sits, unasked and unanswered, at the center of the Alcaraz camp, now that the people who might have pushed back on the wrong decisions are no longer in the room. Djokovic, at 38, is still playing, still chasing a 25th Grand Slam that continues to elude him. He lost the 2026 Australian Open final to Alcaraz in 4 sets, conceding a record he had held for a decade, 10 Australian Open finals, 10 wins, to a player he has spoken about with nothing but respect and admiration. He defended Alcaraz publicly at the Laureus Awards when Spanish media were questioning whether the young player was living up to his potential. He said the criticism made no sense. He said winning 4 Grand Slams at 21 was extraordinary by any standard. He said the expectations being placed on Alcaraz were unreasonable given what he had already delivered. That defense matters. It tells you Djokovic's public position on Alcaraz. The player is not hostile. What his broader statements on values and commercial culture suggest, when placed alongside the documented reality of how the Alcaraz camp operates, is something more pointed than hostility. It is a mirror, a deliberate, carefully worded mirror being held up to a sport that has watched family management structures and sponsorship empires quietly reshape the decision-making around its most talented players, and said very little about it. The Ferrero firing was the loudest signal yet that something in the Alcaraz operation has shifted. 7 years of trust, built across 6 Grand Slam titles and countless hours of collaboration, ended over conditions that the family found unacceptable. The coach who made the player great was replaced not by someone with a stronger tactical vision or a better developmental philosophy, but by an internal restructuring that put more power in the hands of the people who were already running the commercial side of the operation. The man who refused to relocate, who asked for certain professional conditions, who wanted his role respected, he got the same outcome as the man before him. He got shown the door. That is the story Djokovic's words illuminate without ever directly telling. Not that Alcaraz is a bad person, not that his family is uniquely corrupt or uniquely greedy, but that the structure surrounding one of the most gifted players the sport has ever produced is now primarily controlled by people whose financial interests are not always identical to the competitive interests of the player himself, and that the people who might have balanced those interests, the coaches, the professional advisors, the voices in the room who had earned the right to push back, are gone. What happens next depends entirely on whether Alcaraz himself recognizes the distinction between the two. He is 22. He has 7 Grand Slams. He has a career Grand Slam already completed. He has the physical gifts to win another 15 major titles before his body starts telling him otherwise. The ceiling on what he could achieve in this sport, if everything around him is structured correctly, is genuinely unlimited. But unlimited potential has a way of finding its limits when the people managing the empire start making decisions that serve the empire first. Tennis has seen it before, not with this player, not with this family, but with the broader dynamic of extraordinary talent surrounded by commercial machinery that grows powerful enough to start shaping the competitive decisions. Ferrero saw it coming. Santos saw it before him. Djokovic, watching from the other side of the net and the other side of the press conference room, is saying something about values and choices and the cost of letting the wrong priorities win. The wrist will heal. Alcaraz will return to the court. The sponsorship deals will still be there when he does. The question that follows him back onto that court, the question that the Ferrero firing made impossible to avoid and the injury has made impossible to ignore, is whether the family standing behind him is choosing the champion or choosing the brand. Because in the long run, when the Grand Slams stop coming and the empire is all that's left, those two things are not the same. If this story made you think differently about what's actually happening inside the Alcaraz camp, share it with one tennis fan who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter of this story is already being written, and when it breaks, this channel will be the first place that tells you exactly what it means.